everyone! Today I'm gonna take you on a walk through Prague's Jewish Quarter, and we are gonna find out how did it go from this to this. This little neighborhood right next to the Old Town Square is known under many names: Prague's Jewish Quarter, Jewish Ghetto, Fifth Quarter, and Yosefov. This last name comes from the name of the Emperor Joseph II, who freed Jewish people from the quarter in around 1783. Until then, they were completely isolated and did not have the same rights as Christians. Moreover, random acts of violence such as pogroms and poor living conditions made it very hard for Jewish people to prosper. But for our today's video, we are gonna focus only on this specific period of time when the Jewish quarter was transformed into a modern district with Art Nouveau apartment buildings and wide boulevards, and leave the general history of the quarter until next time. Hopefully, the spirit of the old Jewish ghetto will join us for our today's video. Let's go to the first stop. Have a lot of universities around here, so it's always very busy, but we are gonna stop right over there. Right now we are on Kaprova Street, very close to where the border between the former Jewish quarter and the old town used to be. And I mean the literal physical border, because before 1783, Jewish people could not leave the Jewish ghetto, only if they got a special permit, and even with that permit, they still had to wear symbols that would help Christians distinguish them from the crowd. So after 1783, they could finally move out. It was first, of course, richer people and middle-class people, and they moved to nearby streets in the old town, such as this one, Kaprova. I bet you can't recognize it from the old photos. It looks totally different. I'm gonna tell you why a little later. The last gate to the Jewish quarter was demolished only in 1822. And even though the border technically did not exist anymore, it was still in people's heads. So when Jewish people moved to Kaprova Street, there was a rope stretched here to symbolize the border between the Christians and the Jewish people. Okay, let's keep walking. But before we get back to our topic, I just wanted to point out a couple of buildings on Kaprova Street. Actually, why is it called Kaprova? Kaprova means Carp Street. You might be thinking that's because of the nearby river, but the street actually draws its name from the surnames of one of Prague's mayors, Kapor. He used to live here in 16th century. Even though his house is not standing here anymore, the street is still called this way. And if you look at this building over here, you can find the fish ornaments on it. It's actually one of the prettiest buildings here, in my opinion. And this one was constructed by German-speaking architects, but the man who did the decorations was called Richard Luchs. And he was one of the artists from the circle of Gustav Klimt. So if you look at the decorations, which are supposed to represent male and female deities, you can find the resemblance to Klimt's works as well. I also like the house right opposite from it, and it's by a Czech architect Jiří Stipral. Okay, let's get back to the Jewish quarter. A teeny tiny stop over here. Right now you can see Pinkas Synagogue and the entrance to the old Jewish cemetery behind me. Pinkas Synagogue is the second oldest synagogue in Prague, which is now a memorial to Holocaust victims, and the old Jewish cemetery, which was active for 300 years, is one of the most recognizable landmarks of the Jewish quarter. Highly recommend a visit to both. But what I wanted to show you guys is something that is no longer standing here. Let's walk over this way. It is a synagogue that used to stand somewhere over here, and it was called the New Synagogue. It dated back to the end of 16th century. It was founded by Rabbi Isaac Wechsler. This synagogue burned down during the French Fire of Prague in 1689 and then again in 1754, but it was rebuilt and worked as a school. Then it was destroyed during the Prague sanitization, which is a topic that I'm trying to get to slowly but surely. We are getting there. But again, we are now on Shiroka Street, which is a street that is difficult to recognize from the old photos. For example, this is how the northern part of Shiroka Street used to look like. Very different to today. Oh, you see? Fifth quarter. It really was called this way, you guys. It's because it was connected to Prague district-wise later, so that's why it's quarter number 5. Okay, let's go. Can stop here. Hopefully we won't bother anyone on this corner. But I wanted to continue talking about what happened after 1783. So when Jewish people were finally allowed to move out and get property elsewhere in Prague, some of them did. For example, from the statistics in 1843, we know that the population of the Jewish quarter was around 6,200 people, 5,900 out of whom were Jewish. The rest, about 300 people, were Christians. But then, 26 years later, the non-Jewish population rose to almost 5,000 people. And according to census of 1880, only 45% of the Jewish quarter's population was Jewish. So they were gradually being outnumbered by the Christians, mainly poor Christians, because again, the living conditions here were not the best. I know it's kind of hard to tell nowadays, you will see later, especially on Paris Street, but back then it was really one of the worst places to live. However, there was another very unfortunate thing that happened after the Jewish quarter was formally cancelled, and that's the fact that it turned into a red light district. This street, which is called Shiroka, had a lot of brothels here. If you have a look at this old photograph, the north side of Shiroka Street had houses which were covered with white cloth. That usually meant that they were used as brothels. There were a lot of them here, and one very famous one was called Friedman's brothel, because it was owned by private detective Leopold Friedman. So the prostitutes that worked for him were actually his informants. Pretty convenient. It was one of the high-end brothels of Prague. Let's have a closer look at this building. Very pretty Art Nouveau building. So if you have a look at it, you will notice these two statues of naked ladies. Perhaps the sculptor knew that there used to be this very famous brothel here, because it looks like these ladies are arguing about something. Right, we've arrived to Paris Street. Gonna tell you about this one in a moment. Let's continue with our timeline. So by the end of the 19th century, Jewish Quarter turned into a very dodgy neighborhood. On top of that, there were a lot of problems when it came to the living conditions. There was no clean water, no sewage system. That led to the rise in infectious diseases such as typhus. Something had to be done about it, and that something was called sanitization. Sanitization is an urban process of replacing old buildings with beautiful, spacious Art Nouveau apartments with all necessary amenities. It was done in many other European cities. Prague wasn't the only city where they did that, and the plan for Prague sanitization was called Finis Ghetto. It was approved by 1896, and it was concerning the area of over 365,000 square meters, 93,000 out of which were the Jewish ghetto, and the rest, more than 200,000, I cannot count right now, was the old town, because Jewish Quarter wasn't the only area that was sanitized back then. As you can probably guess, this project needed a lot of financing, which was achieved through 20 years long tax relief. Perry Street was one of the first streets that was created during sanitization, and the original plan for it was to connect it with the Wenceslas Square, but that meant they would have to demolish large part of the old town, which they ended up not doing. And that was created to make a draft that would air out all the diseases and illnesses from the Jewish Quarter. I'm not sure that's how it works, but that was the thought behind it. Nowadays, Perry Street is one of the most expensive places to live in Prague. All of the rich people live here. Remember this billionaire that was killed during the helicopter ride? Has an apartment here. Former Czech Prime Minister has an apartment here. A lot of celebrities live here. And of course you have a lot of really expensive shops. Bulgari, Prada, Rolex. I mean, you have it all. We will continue this way. And there is a car from my childhood. Anyways. But we cannot film it because we will interrupt another photo shoot if we do. So we'll just go this way. Franz Kafka? Maybe. Right, we've arrived to our next stop. Before I continue with the history, let's appreciate how quiet it is. There are no photo shoots in front of Dior and huge groups of people and cars that look like they're old, but they're not. But I'm gonna talk about the house which is no longer standing here. This house was called Bashevi house. Jakob Bashevi was a Jewish banker from Verona who moved to Prague in the end of 16th century. He was a close person to multiple emperors, including Rudolf II, and he was awarded with many privileges. As you might remember, guys, Jewish people were not allowed to leave the Jewish ghetto, but he could. He could also buy property outside of the ghetto, he could do businesses, and he was also one of the first Jewish people to be awarded an aristocratic title. So Jakob Bashevi was very important for the Jewish community, and he gave back to the community. He built a synagogue that I'm gonna mention a little bit later, and he also had his gorgeous house right where you can see this building. The Bashevi house was destroyed during sanitization and replaced with this building by Otakar Novotny. It's a modernist building. When in doubt, say that the building is a modernist building, right? Nowadays they have co-working spaces. Let's go this way. Guys, which one is the sidewalk? Which one is the wall? I'm so confused. And by the way, subscribe. All right, let's continue. Don't get stuck in the bushes, Václav. All right, let's keep talking about sanitization because you won't believe it, but I'm not done. Usually we say like 3 sentences about it on the tour, and then it turns out to be a much longer discussion. So to sanitize the area, they had to destroy close to 620 buildings where 7,000 people lived. We're trying to cross currently, which is very difficult. All right. So they had to expropriate the buildings. And that was a very difficult task because in the case of the Jewish Quarter, there could be up to 40 people that would own one building. It was very cramped in there. So that was a very long process. It took them a few years. And understandably, a lot of people did not want to move out. They wanted to stay. So they were trying to prolong it as much as they could. The sanitization was being delayed. Some people could demolish their houses and build the new ones in accordance with the sanitization plan, but there were not many of those people because, of course, you had to be pretty rich to build a huge apartment house here. Let's stop here for a moment. And the rest of the people had to be paid off. They were called to the old town hall where a committee of the sanitization had told them how much they would be paid in retributions for their lost properties. And often people were not happy with the final prices. For example, for a property that would cost 8,500 normally, they were usually paid 4,500. One of the people lamented that he bought a coat and then sold it for the price of a button. In the end, they didn't have a choice because sanitization was a law and the government had to take their houses away. Okay, let's go this way. Maybe some of you recognize this statue. This is a statue of Franz Kafka, and if you would like to find out where Franz Kafka lived, where he went to school, and other places which are connected to him in Prague, you can watch the video that we will leave in the description. And we will continue this way. Okay, what I wanted to show you guys is actually this place, so you can have a look. We are now in front of Spanish Synagogue and the Church of the Holy Spirit. So I will show you now how this place looked like before. This is it. As you can see, there were also houses around the church that were destroyed during the sanitization, and the church and the synagogue are still standing here. Just a few words about the Spanish synagogue. It is built in Moorish style of architecture and it dates back to 1860s. There used to be another synagogue / school called Temple or Old School here before, and then it was demolished and they replaced it with this beautiful one. Let's talk about one of the powerhouses of Prague sanitization, Dr. August Stein. He later became one of the founders of the Prague Jewish Museum, because after the sanitization was over in 1906, they founded the Jewish Museum. When you come to Prague nowadays, all of the synagogues, old Jewish cemetery and ceremonial hall are part of that museum. So when it comes to August Stein, he was a proponent of an idea that Jewish people from Prague's Jewish Quarter need to lean into being more Czech. You might be thinking, what else would they be, Valerie? Surely there were only Czech people living in Prague. The answer is no. There were also a lot of Germans. And it might surprise some of you, but the native language of Prague's Jewish quarter used to be German. German was spoken at home, at work, everywhere, really. The only Jewish newspaper that was published in Czech lands was published in German language. If you remember, Franz Kafka wrote in German. He was actually more of an exception than a rule because he also spoke Czech. A lot of Jewish people from Prague's Jewish quarter did not speak Czech at all. Augustine did, but he didn't come from here. He was from a small village. You can go this way. And he thought that Czech language and Czech culture, should be adopted by Jewish people from the Prague Jewish quarter. Here stood two synagogues. One was called Velkodvorska, that was founded by Jakob Bashevi. And then there was another one called Cikanova, founded by Salomon Cikan. And that is the synagogue, I believe, where Franz Kafka had his bar mitzvah. So both of these synagogues were unfortunately destroyed during the sanitization. And later they built this cubist house, which is called Teacher's House. It's actually a whole block of cubist houses. Yeah, get used to these sounds when you are near Paris Street. Obviously, sanitization improved the quality of life. The whole quarter went from rags to riches because of sanitization, but it also destroyed a lot of really valuable historical sites, such as these two synagogues. Even when sanitization was going on, there were already camps of artists and intellectuals that were opposing it. They were writing petitions and manifestos saying that sanitization is going to destroy the spirit of Prague. And one man, Willem Mrštík, was essentially somebody who saved the lesser town from sanitization, because the plan was to sanitize the Malá Strana lesser town as well. In the end, they did not do that. They managed to figure out the sewage system without demolishing everything. And of course, they could have done the same here, I would say. Sure, maybe some houses would have been destroyed, but they would keep the spirit of the Jewish quarter, I think. We are just passing by a giant construction. They were selling ice cream there. How lovely. It's like +10 right now. Definitely don't need an ice cream. Don't need Dolce & Gabbana either, but it's here. Right, let's find a spot. This looks good. Okay. All right, we've arrived to the Old New Synagogue, the oldest surviving European synagogue, and also the oldest surviving Czech synagogue, obviously. Dates back to 1270. It is a Gothic synagogue. You can visit it nowadays. They have ticket office right behind it, and also one down this way. But what I wanted to show you guys are, of course, some of the historical pictures. This is how this place looked like. The houses that were on this side of the street are missing as well. And according to a story, in one of those houses, there used to be a very famous hotel and pub located called Denice. And this pub was very popular, especially after midnight. In fact, it would be just empty until midnight every day. And after midnight, it turned into a crazy party. They had the pianist there. They called him the teacher. Not sure why. Maybe he worked as a teacher in school in the past. And this pub was so popular that it was eventually shut down by the police, even before sanitization took place. Thank you so much for watching our video. Don't forget to tip the guide through super thanks if you enjoyed it, and we will see you in our next one. Bye!